So, how shall I put it? The school is all about a serious intellectual exercise for everybody. And what I like about this school is that this intellectual exercise is setting the tone. And this is done by our friends. I've been telling you about my perception of my generation. But nowadays, we have a speaker in front of us, person, and I'm very proud that he came to the school not only today, just Sergey Shumakov, who in point of fact was the alumnus, a very dedicated, very intense listener, and an alumnus of an outstanding philosopher and our great friends whose ideas were the foundation of the school. And I want to say it now, not because I have this good opportunity to mention it, but for another reason, because his very last conversation that we taped at home several hours before his death, and we asked him, Yuri and myself were asking him about the school. And he said, this should be done at all necessarily, because there is a serious gap between, please give his name, this Mirab Mamardashvili, and, well, this is not an intrigue, like Seryoja, I feel acutely, and he said there is a gap. And in order to move forward, this gap should be filled by education. But education for which purpose? Going where? Where is this gap? Well, it was little. We should say that our generation and the dissidents who were the most active, the most daring people, we all wanted the fall of the Soviet Union. We didn't know what would follow. Nothing was suggested. And what happens just because the skill of the previous culture, I suppose this is what Seryoja will discuss, works much harder than what was in some thoughts, somebody's mind of a very small group of people. And Seryoja belongs to a very different generation. It's always interesting to listen to what he has to say. We haven't seen one another for a while, for several years now, and now we met again. He attends the seminars, and it is surprising that nowadays Georgy Boft spoke about professionalism. Sergey Shumakov is in charge of Kultura, a culture TV channel, very much like in Soviet time as well as in today's Russia. This is one of central TV channels for those who want to educate both their soul and their spirit. And I give the floor to him. Thank you very much, Lena. Quite a serious introduction. I now have to live up to it. And, well, dear colleagues, and I hope friends, just as a foreword, I want you to be lenient towards me, because I'm not a public speaker, and as of today I'm not a researcher either, or an investigator. I'm a person who works in the fields. What I do is that I do very simple things, but the circumstances that brought me here have to do first and foremost with the questions that, as I worked, I periodically have to raise and to ask these questions, but I do not know the answers. That is why my own apology to all of you, and I want you to be lenient towards me. It has to do with my being, well, how shall I put it, with this sort of negative knowledge, not in terms of evaluation or assessment, but in essence, I do not know what I should tell you. What is it that I should tell you here? I want to apologize for, again, saying it, for this very strange introduction to my speech, but I very strongly want to be honest before you, not in terms of that I'm saying things that I think of, but in terms of that the logic of our conversation, it would be interesting for me in the area of the unknown. Not the things that you know that you are being told about, things that, in a certain sense, is consumption of the knowledge that is falling upon us from all kinds of sources. But the questions that we should ask ourselves, but there are no answers. The topic that we chose sounds like this, if I'm not mistaken: the phenomenon of the Soviet man in post-Soviet space, something like it. This sentence, I do not understand one single word here. This is what I want to begin with, so that we should have a very interesting and exciting conversation. And another important, I'm not a person in ideology, I'm not a researcher, I'm not a lecturer. I'm speaking before you about things that I do not know of. If we stay within this space, this very small space, and try to show constraint, I'm warning you, because things that I will be telling you will be sometimes very nasty, and nasty for myself. And try to stay away from a judgment. Let's just talk about it. Maybe at the end of our conversation you will see questions arising in your own soul, and you will try to find answers on your own, and I think that this is the most important thing. This is just a letter of foreword. So, what is, do I deliver the presentation for some 20-30 minutes, okay, and then Q&A? Okay, let's follow. Phenomenon of Soviet... Let's leave the word phenomenon. So, Soviet man. Well, quite fantastic matter. Because things are so understandable about it, that there are several quite rough terms, tough terms, that immediately show how judgmental you are. Soviet man, you know, there is also
такая аббревиатура «совок».
An abbreviation like acronym SOVOK, which has very negative connotation. SOVOK is a dustpan you use to clean your room, but which recently is being seen in from a very different perspective. If you remembered, I hope you do remember, that some 10 or 20 year experience, for surely 10 years, you remember, your memory goes back to 10 years. Sovok was quite a categorical, rough and tough, harsh judgment of social structure of the policy in the Soviet times. Nowadays, what we see online, I tried to look it up, it's now showing different layers. We see cracks, like cracks in marble. For some people, still, Savok, it's still something very base intellectually, socially very limited, politically very hostile, reactionary notion which has to do with the Soviet Union, with its past. The interpreter begs to differ here. I find it very offensive. And for many people who use it in this sense, this first and foremost, it's judging what we said farewell to, something that we got free of. At the same time, we see evolving, and this is highly symptomatic, softer interpretations, saying that Savok is... This is like soft, ironic definition. and those values and misconceptions which subconsciously we continue to cultivate in our soul. Sometimes we're waking up with them, and they belong to this ideal past, which regrettably is also gone. A rather more nostalgic perspective. What is surprising is that both attitudes, from the very start, are present in those signature copies that history has kept for us. Several people who claim that they coined this word. One of them was singer Alexander Gradsky, who told a remarkable story when he, in those days, as he was in the sandpit as children, and they had not as children, and they had a bottle of port wine, so they used these, but Gradsky didn't have enough, and what was just a small pan where children used to play just in build some sandcastles. This is one version. While I had a story which is more academic, quite funny too, is the observation about Soviet tourists who traveled to socialist countries. There were several other stories which do not really matter. And what I suggest to you is the existing notion to for what purpose? So that you could somehow decide to jump into the water and say one phrase, utter one phrase, which I've been thinking about for a long while, but suddenly I came to realize that it has the right to exist, and it sounds like this. It rather goes like this. As I try to apply to my own experience, to my own past, all those interpretations, I was surprised to discover that they quite apply to me. I'm speaking about my own personal experience, that they all go well with me. Moreover, a phrase that will not sound politically correct. If you scrub just a Russian, you will reach a Tartar under his skin. So if you scrub the Soviet Russian, you will immediately find Soviet Tatar under his skin. So if I had scratched myself, I wouldn't find anything but Soviet background in myself. And this is quite a sad but very honest statement. Because a vast number of troubles that we are happening to us have to do with us being here. We're not Soviet, but there behind the windows are Soviet people around us. And this false perspective, this false position, seems to me doesn't allow us to realize what is going on with us and how we can position ourselves in today's world.
Говорят честно, что вот я специально себя беру в качестве примера. Говорят честно, что во мне ничего нет, что не связано было бы с Советом.
If we are honest in claiming that whatever exists in me is only Soviet background, again, education, skills, languages, manner of speech, the way I dress, the way I behave a smile, as I flirt to women, as I'm chased by women, all these possible images of manners, and most importantly, this internal mechanism, inner mechanism that makes me behave in this way, but not in any other way. I truly realize that this has to do with what could be called as Soviet. Moreover, some of my political and social responses also are related to what is called Soviet, an almost Freudian story about what's your take on the Soviet as something that belongs to me or belongs to somebody else. This is a major problem for society as well. This society is truly ill because it doesn't articulate these processes in its public conscience. Whereas Soviet, I'm just speeding up these things. In the meantime, Soviet things that don't have to do with the Soviet Union alone. Am I speaking in a manner that you understand me? This is a certain merge, something that was evolved by a 1,000-year-old history of Russia, and then in this remarkable manner, almost genetically transformed in the times of the Soviet Empire. And what was mentioned here, Mirab Konstantinovich Mamardashvili, gave a very tragic and precise definition, saying it was an anthropological disaster, catastrophe, saying whatever happened to man, humans, in the space of the former Russian Empire in that time, he called it anthropological disaster because a certain type of human evolved, and human conscience evolved, where he had many images. One of the most horrible images, he says that thoughts like here grows within, grows inside, sort of, towards inside, and these thoughts and this hair is all mixed up and goes into, and this is something that breaks your soul and makes you behave in a very inadequate manner. What is all about it? Human attribute to this is that it carries on within us, it is not gone, and it's very hard to say goodbye to it. So huge mistake had to do with say in 5 years we got rid of this happy past and tried to treat it as people who are like everybody else. This is a global mistake, truly. Not only as a political mistake, this mistake actually gives rise to a huge number of all kinds of surrealistic arguments, such as, for example, that in Russia we see restoration of Soviet system. It's absolute rubbish, absolutely outlandish, because this is being said with somebody who mimics, tries to look like freedom. Because the horrors of this anthropological catastrophe create evolvement of a type of man who is capable to mimic in a fantastic manner and creating this type of thinking which is like all based upon imitation. Imitation to such extent that Mirab once told, says here, they even know to imitate the feeling of imitation of life. So this is a remarkable thing. So people who claim that nowadays we're restoring the Soviet Union, restoring the Soviet Empire, it's absolute rubbish, absolute silly thing to say, because you don't have to restore anything. We're exactly in the same point where we left the subject some 25 years ago. We haven't moved an inch since then. And this conscience makes us in a certain way to respond to whatever is going on. But that illusionary conscience that we lived in for some recent years, it's in remarkable way, it used to create this atmosphere of absence of roots and this irresponsibility. In this tragic situation where the country found itself in, and all of us, there is one positive trait, as minimum, at least one. This is this feeling that reality is close by, is out there. This illusion of Russia, And all of a sudden it turned out that we're not Europeans yet, at least yet. Indeed, we are extremely far from articulated civic society. It is true that we are far from ability for intellectual thinking and artistic and spiritual experience. Because these 20 years, in this sense, were wasted.
Говорю об вопросах культуры.
I'm speaking about culture here. It is surprising. A vast number of books were written about it.
Читателей, которые эти книги способны читать. Если вы вспомните тот...
But there are no readers. If you recall the horrible historic experience that the country lived through 17 years, it first created its readership and then started to create its own literature. For that matter, great literature. The same could be said about cinema, about music, and so on and so forth. So, in this sense, the notion Soviet, I would also treat it as minimum with greater restraint. Because, as again, I'm saying that I think that this is the cash, sort of, we carry, which we can deal in, as we try to oppose it, trying to take it in consideration, relying upon it, renouncing it, but disregarding it and ignoring it and pretending that it does not exist. I suppose it's criminally silly, which leads us to disaster. 23 minutes. I've been speaking for 23 minutes. Do I have any more time left? This is very important because I haven't said one single thing about the point, the essence of all this. But culture is multi-layered. And somewhere in its base we are omitting the rules and motivation and morality and so on. If we go down to the very core, to the very nucleus, we will tackle the notions that identify the culture of any nation. They are space and time, attitude towards time and space. This is dominating over how and what we think. It's represented in all superficial areas of our culture and life. So that you should understand it, I'm again omitting these, judgmental approaches and appraisals and evaluations and these kinds of haughty and arrogant and, in my view, absolutely senseless definitions. As we were getting ready during the break, you and I had tea and recalled old jokes. And quite unexpectedly, we would name several names, great names really. I recalled, for example, Knorozov. Yuri recalled Rybakov. Great Soviet researchers and scientists, and rather men of humanities, they're not scientists. But they speak about attitude towards time and space. Neither of them ever traveled. Whatever knowledge they had, they got it from books, plus schools of thought and research. But then what followed is freedom, and when they traveled abroad, they would even play tricks that are like circus. Knorozov, this is the person who deciphered the Meyer, famous, amazing person who lived in a 16 square meter room in St. Peter, had a desk and a heap of paper, never owned anything else. And this is when he was deciphering the Mayan alphabet. Mayan scriptures. He became a legend in Mexico, came like godlike. So when he traveled to Mexico, the next morning he gathered his Mexican friends and he took them on an excursion. He showed them around the city which he has never been to before. He would tell them remarkable things, and this is not his personal gift, sort of. This is done by dozens of other people who traveled abroad, who immediately penetrated the point of it all, without traveling, without needing to travel anywhere. Why I'm speaking this, it has to do with a special attitude towards space and time. I'm very sorry for turning this unexpected turn. If you don't take it in consideration, then you do not understand a thing about the country you live in. You don't understand a word about, say, eschatological, or what is it, belief in the future. Why the Soviet people were made in such manner that they believed in the future. It was called like silly. They ridiculed this for a while, but fundamentally that is how the mentality worked. And when all bad things turn out, this queer, this strange, irrational feeling that things will turn out well. I'm saying that deep within us we have these bugs, sort of, that live a life of their own as they run within our mentality. And it would be good to face them and to meet them. I, for example, in a surprising manner, as a man who professionally dealt with culture, am always surprised by one surprising thing. I don't know how it happened, but this is true. This is what communists succeeded. Together, the huge global legacy. Even Lenin had a formula. I don't remember. The point was that a true communist can be only the man or a woman who will stand on the shoulders of great giants of the past. This is kind of rubbish and will master this, something like this. But the surprising thing is that this is how it works, and this is how it would happen. Why? Because they subordinated to themselves the huge European culture of Christian culture and Arabic culture. This is incredible, but it is so. This perception, this feeling of a man who was born, when Soviet man was born, had one remarkable inequality. He was born immediately with a sense of feeling that he was good, because he felt that he was an heir, Nowadays that we are born, we don't have this feeling, what kind of heirs and successors we are. Therefore, the Chekhovs, Tolstoys, Dostoevsky, they worked hard, writing the books, just for me when I was born, so that I should receive this explanation, that we chose the right way, the right path. My life is great. This mobilization.
And this mobilization of culture, it was just amazingly built in a way that everything has been thrown out into the future. So I gave an example. I like this example very much because it's from my childhood. And because I went to a Soviet school, everything was straightforward there, expected. And I remember how they were reading Filipok, this famous short story by Tolstoy. And it's about little boy, you remember, he was in the village, and so he got the high boots, and I saw from his older brother, and he went to school, and the teacher said to him, so you're going just to study, you'll become a student, a pupil, and now the felt boots so became wet, and so he was, and then he was thinking and sitting. So that we're so lucky, because we go to school and we don't have to borrow any felt boots from my elder brother, because it was so, everything was available. So that was a very strong feeling that we were much better. But it's back in the back of our mind, so it was kind of scratching there, and I realized how lucky I was. So that was the literature, infected literature, because Dostoevsky, so he was a clairvoyant, but he never said that we would live happy lives. And he never said that we would be living absolutely happy. And it works. it works when they say that the past was worse than the present. And then, so when these horrible reforms of education started, then Furstenka, so the Minister of Culture and Education, suggested that, so let's call a spade, because he started to destroy the system of education existing at that time in Russia. So this unity of cultural unity that we refer to as the Soviet people, and so actually he raised his hand at something valued most by the Russians, and because the government, Russian government, so because the most progressive people are always in the government, though they don't look such, because they keep low profile, and so they look as the people who are looked upon as stupid and slow thinking, but actually in reality, so they were very smart, always very smart people in the government. So he wanted to take out the ideology from education, to take out so so to make it not ideological in its essence. So for example, Eugene Onegin and Pushkin. So to take out, because all these cohesions, to break it out, because the Soviet Union is unique education, so is a unique machine, fantastically efficient machine, and very efficient, because it's a unique machine, this Soviet education. I always give this example. In 1918, so then the wild people, so uneducated, hungry students came to to Soviet universities. So then sailors, peasants. 10 years later, so they got the fine, refined Soviet intelligentsia in 10 years' time. So we got the best quality of intelligentsia, with vibrant, understanding, professional. So can you imagine the power of this machine? So 10 years later, and then this intelligentsia, this Soviet-made intelligentsia, went through the war, restored everything. But the most amazing thing, that this intelligentsia that made it and did it, then eventually they managed, in later years, they managed to explain to the people how the world is designed. So after World War II, because those are the children of those, the first wave of intelligence. Okay, so we're wasting time, but actually they explained how the world is. I love those people. I respect those people. I think the people who came back from World War II. So then, read famous Russian novel, Life and Fate. This is the greatest Soviet novel, Жизнь and Судьба. So then, people in Stalingrad. It's absolutely amazingly talented novel by Grossman, Life and Fate. So without food, without weapons. So they were fighting off the Germans at the house of Pavlov, and at that time they realized that they were absolutely free. So in this fire, so cleansed them, and they realized that they had no fear, and then they created everything what we had until 1991. So I'm sorry that I'm talking in this sporadic way. And I put everything together, bundling everything, so just talking about conclusions and corollaries. But I need to talk about that unfortunately we do not have an idea of how our public conscience is organized. We don't know that. Thank you. And so let's open our discussion. Grineva Daria, Moscow. I wanted to, when you were talking about the imitative thinking, so very interesting. So my question has to do with in the post-Soviet generation, when people lived in this atmosphere of negation of the Soviet past. And so when the Soviet past was regarded negatively, was thought of negatively, negative terms only, so how they perceived this ability to imitate, because for them it was not only negation, but when they could perceive it as this negation as something objectively given, because and how, in your view, this impacted their ability to imitate, or negating everything. And so then, when forming the relationship to what is happening around, so complete escapism, nihilism, whatever. I'm just being fuzzy with my question, but I didn't understand your question, but I get the inkling. I understand what you're driving at. You're trying to understand where there is this thin line between the generation that appeared after 1991 and does it borrow and all these chronic diseases from the past, and how does it manifest itself, and about the imitation, and so this is all more or less. I'm quite optimistic here, because I have to talk to students, young guys, and this is the first generation, if I remember right. Yeah, first generation, which so does not know what the Soviet Union was de facto. They're 17-year-olds, right? So they don't remember the Soviet Union because they were born later, and yeah. De facto, right? It's even more. It's 20-year-olds already, not 17. I admire them, mixed with some desperation. That's how I feel to them. So desperation has to do with that they absolutely. They are ignorant. They are boundlessly ignorant. So actually, Filipov doesn't work anymore. So Furstenka managed to do that. They don't know anything. They don't have pity for anything. They don't feel sorry for anything. It's a tabula rasa, completely tabula rasa. They don't understand anything. And maybe this is the reason why they're very free, ignorant, free, and talented. And this is ironic. This is ironic. I don't know how to answer this question. And it's a easy and free attitude, moving in their solutions, in their brain fancy work. Because I teach at VGIC, Cinematographic Institute, and so they offer amazing, beautiful solutions. I'll give an example. So the dainty solutions. So the students, the second grade students, made the work about the stupid guy. And so I'm 20-year-old, and so 20 years after, and then 20, then 50 years later. And so then a story about the boy, who was missing class, and then he met a girl, and then I think that we had met before, and he started to making advances at her because he likes her, and he was missing so he was missing this class. And as he said, I know where we met. So we met at Goa in India, at the beach. Yes, and so that was in November. No, it was in July. Exactly, yes, at the end of July. So that's where we were in Goa, and I was there. Do you remember that we talked to you? And so he's making advances at her. And no, but you remember at the dawn we talked? No. So we didn't talk at dawn, but we were talking at the dusk. So no, it's the dusk. No, it's the dawn. Okay, and then she opens up. So this boy, so he's 3 years old, and so he just produces a little picture. So this boy is 3 years old. It's amazing how they start a conversation. So where are you going? So because we're in a hurry. So because I need just to pick up my boy from the kindergarten, and I have to go back to my college. And then all of a sudden I'm terrified because they kind of made a joke, but this joke is about life. So they played with the life, because there was no boy and there was no girl. He didn't go to Goa, and she didn't go to Goa, and there was no meeting at dusk or dawn. There was nothing, but actually they played it. So very dramatic, very 3D, very graphic. It's just amazing. You don't have to read books to do that. Yeah. and this is something that that this comes out of you, like this energetic, vibrant, pillar of power. And so they don't even imitate, because they take it out of themselves somehow, and they make it amazingly with great deal of sincerity. I don't know how long they will last, because culture and art is organized in a way that such protuberances, so this upsurges, these spikes, so they cannot last for much longer, because you have to have a solid foundation, because the depth is very little, and that's why. So they can probably do it for a couple of certain period of time, but then you will have to rely on something, because the depth of talent, the depth of amazing capabilities is the foundation. But this spirit of them being able to imitate is there, and they're wonderful. So they managed to articulate this passion for imitation. And they imitated, and then they got rid of it. Am I talking in a coherent way? So this generation, that generation is not. We imitate to the end. So that's why our men and women, they fight to the end in court. For example, they are devoid of this wonderful freedom. Because so she plays a woman and he plays a man, and they fight each other, they pit against each other, and they trample upon each other, tear each up to pieces, so they mangle their children, and that's the old generation. So because they cannot give up, they cannot surrender, but the young guys, so they are much easier in this respect, and in this. And so they just abandon without any bad feelings with the past bad experiences. They just say goodbye. So one little point. I wanted just to deepen the question that was verbalized. And what do you do with? So then even the foundation is imitated. Cultural foundation is with the framework of the present-day ideology. So then the protagonist that you're talking about. So this is getting the second wind, because she's a negative protagonist, but as a foundation. So not to be someone like Kolya Mishcherskaya, not to be unfaithful and lack of loyalty. So they offer certain imitation foundation. So in the form of cultural values, and then there is a situation when they do not imitate the process of thinking, but the foundation on which it sets is imitated. And this is a big monument on clay feet that may collapse any second. And understand your question, but the answer will be quite straightforward. There is no imitation in this sense, because it existed, but we didn't notice it. That's first thing. Second thing is that there is a certain logic of people's behavior that makes people behave this way and not the other way. And this logic, this deterministic logic, is dictated by the fact that the process that we need to have in our public conscience properly thought out and brought to the surface, like it's done. So they were in a kind of clandestine, latent, worried limbo, and now it's beginning to work. When the president said, "So you want me? You demand that I manage differently. So you want." So you want me not to manage everything by hand, but how? You don't want me to manage everything by hand, but how? It means that all the models and all the relationships between the people, so they eventually push you out to the necessity of handling everything by hand. I'm not talking that it's good or bad. So because if you say bad or good, then there's no need to discuss it any longer. Because I don't want labels. That's why the system forces you to do this set of actions and not that set of actions. And I understand what you are talking about, something that the behavior of many political leaders, political parties, and so it reminds us of this horrible past, the terrible past. So which is kind of restoring. So no, this is wrong, because nothing is being restored because nothing has been destroyed, and so we need to remember that. So the mechanism is working. So we thought it worked differently, but it has always been working this way. And the power is a strange instrument. They cannot respond to what you want, to your desire, to your activity, because we need institutions. We need to create a certain a number of mechanisms that would allow for the system to work differently. But if they don't, so it will work the way it has been working all the time. And that's why this imitation question has to do with many. So we understand and see clearly that the number of stupid things that people say publicly is many more. But these stupidities the stupidities are tinted differently, but they are publicly pronounced. So this is very sad, but this is not horrible. This is just sad. And for me, that the only fully fledged result of the 20-year development of the country resides in the fact that there is a certain environment where we have a number of people who think in a certain way, in fashion, and differently, and who are capable to produce future. And so we have created this stratum. And so this, I'm vague, but the young people who are who become businessmen and politicians today, they are the people who are not, I'd like to stress it, a genetic, congenital part of this mechanism. So they are not part of this. And so this new environment, free environment, public environment, it's free. The public environment is free. This environment is free now. Is free now, and so certainly there are many limitations, restrictions, constraints that we are not happy with, some mechanism, but by and large it's free. And so the ability to speak, to think and do is there, and to a great extent. And it's there because in the last 20 years we have managed to create a new generation of people, young people, who are capable of abandoning these horrible cliches. So my hope is there. I'm watching. And so I'm part of the Soviet epoch, and the people who lived under socialism in the Soviet Union, so they have this nostalgia for the Soviet Union, remembering the poverty and persecution. So is this a phenomenon? Why is it? Because it's the phenomenon of a Soviet person. Yes, that's a phenomenon of a Soviet person. It's not a phenomenon of a human being. So don't look in it for something special, unique. So Russian specifics. Don't look for it. It's not there. It's not the case. Because there is another level of a conversation that I decided not to go up to, because it's very painful, and I decided to leave it behind. But the word Soviet, so there is another very important notion that goes through the word Sovietsky, Soviet, that has to do with civilization processes. Soviet is not only a certain condition of your brain, it's the condition of civilization. because on the 1/6 part of the world, which is called the Soviet Empire, then the Soviet Union, and then the Russian Federation now. So then we still have very strong functioning civilization global mechanisms, and what's happening today, I'm not going to say specifically, is the result. What's happening now is the result of this tectonic things, and the clash, a burst occurred, and this is where it's all happening now. And this is a civilizational processes, not political, not economic. It's much deeper. It's a very serious thing. That's why when people remember, because they don't remember good life, the first thing they remember is this feeling of time, the perception of time. So the time that is there, you have it. So once you are born, you get this certificate, which says you are a happy Soviet person. It may be a lie, but it works. And then another thing, that you are part of civilization, and it's written on your birth certificate, and it's a big civilization. And it was a gigantic, efficient, a huge, especially now, a part of the world. So which managed to build so the system of international relations, so which we cannot do it in Europe, for example. So, but in Russia they managed this relationship between the peoples of the Soviet Union. They managed to do, and failing to do that in EU. And we need to understand which way we need to go. We cannot cancel it. We cannot abrogate it. It's impossible. And if you want to feel it, you need to go to the border of the Russian Federation and Ukraine. You will see immediately what I mean. Public Moscow, Igor. So business question. You were saying that in the eyes of people, so ignorance, horrible, boundless ignorance in the eyes of the youth. Well, don't you see any global problems? So then absence of desire for the young people to strive for anything. So they don't want to study, they don't want to learn, they don't want to achieve anything. And do we need to speak about it? It's absolutely absence of any desire to do anything. A very simple answer. No, I don't think that way, because don't look for any Russian specifics as part of the global process. And in Spiegel magazine, a month ago, I read a wonderful article, so the Merkel generation. So that's exactly, so they're the young people who are indifferent, politically neutral, and sad, consumerists, etc., and ignorant. So that's a big sociological article, the Merkel generation. Yeah, interesting article. But I don't want us to over-dramatize the situation, because you represent business, and you need to understand that that motivation in business has always been irrational. It forces you to run like a headless chicken. You don't know why, and achieve ends. Well, you don't know why, because there's because things that you cannot even explain. Why do we have just to run around this hectic, senseless activity? Why? And you're asking me about political infantility, but I'm talking about so I'm talking about general attributes. But do we need to change it, or we think everything is fine? But no. So in Russia, things cannot be good. No, certainly we need to change, and we should not stop to change. But how to change that attitudes, and what do we need to get as a result? I think that the best way to go about it is to try to retain our public space, public environment. Not to allow this public environment, public space to disappear. Not to let culture disappear, dialogue disappear, philosophy to disappear, not to allow to keep it, and school to disappear, and then higher education institutions to disappear, and the most important, the corner, and so rest, entertainment, tourism. So we need to keep them all, and because this balloon So because it's because like lungs, if they collapse, then a person cannot breathe. Yeah, so this public space, this public environment, it's kind of lungs that allow people, the state, the country to breathe, and so this is the most important for the country's survival and go through this difficult and challenging stretch of the road. I have two questions. First question. Two main. Question has that in Soviet times there were good examples of art, movies, literature, in spite of the involvement of the state, influence, and the Iron Curtain. So now just so there is more freedom, and there is no culture, and what's happening to the modern Russian culture, art and movies. And the second, he spoke about Grossman. So how do we overcome the past? So, for example, so this life and fate, why we don't study it, why it's not in the curriculum. I'm just at a loss for words. And what should I start with? Grossman. Start with Grossman is quite straightforward because I had the honor to be the producer of this series, Life and Fate, and I was there. I participated. Why it's not in the curriculum, school curriculum? Because if they don't study it, I think it's good. It's good they don't study it, because there are certain pieces of art, literature. So there's certain ream of books, that you have to read, and so you can. They're unreadable. There's too many. And they won't read. It's better just to keep it as something that you will read at a later stage, at your leisure and intellectual. I was not saying under socialism it was good. I didn't say that. I was saying that under socialism, Soviet Union, we built this mechanism of culture and ideology, education, upbringing. It was all there. Fully, and it was a finely tuned, efficient mechanism. Everything was just a clockwork precision, and worked very well. And that's the reason why. What we refer to as ideology. And to some exchange, in this strange way, they just changed this meaning, because the ideology replaced philosophy, religion, culture, and everything, the works. That's why it had to carry this huge burden.
The Soviet cinema, in its best manifestations, was a quasi-philosophy. And even the best films were, in a way, an almost a substitute for the philosophy, or even for the religion. If you remember Stalker of Andrei Tarkovsky, in the Positive or Negative Experience, an artist had some starting ground. He or she may have despised it, but and of course there are those who hate the Soviet Union and their past experience, but indeed such hatred is almost like love. This hatred is so strong that it can almost be qualified as its antipode. And today there is no such starting ground, and an attempt to imitate some superficial models, such as American cinema or European cinema, does not seem to work. There have been times. I know a little bit about the inner workings of a cinema. and I will just allow myself for a momentary digression. The intolerance, the first long American movie. It's a huge Protestant fresco which goes through all ages of the Protestantism, and a man is under death penalty, and he must be executed. And so here we can have Babylon, Jerusalem, France, and the epochs go through this process of justification of the law, because eventually the man must be executed, but in the last moment when that man must be executed, justice prevails. So this is like a cultural code or a gene. This gene is planted, and the great cinema grows up. But that does not mean that this is the only formula, because 6 years before that film, the great Russian cinema started with the first large, long Russian cinema, which was called The Defense of Sebastopol, which was the first Russian long cinema film, and the history grew in a different direction. And there was a different foundation, a different civilizational and cultural situation. And can you try to change them with places? No, this will be an absurd. Can you replace these things with each other? No. That is why you have to treat so gingerly the past which is in our heads, the history which subsides in our heads, in our minds. Sergey Gogin from Ulyanovsk. I can try and understand the mentality of the Soviet people who were formed in these times. But how can one explain the nostalgia of the young people for the Soviet past who never, not for a day, lived in the Soviet Union, never saw the... This is quite easy. This is very easy. This is on almost a genetic story. When one says Soviet, I tried to depart from the usual labels, the Sovok. If we may take the alien image in the American cinema, when out of the breast an alien gets out of a man or woman who never thought. How did he get infected? How did he get the bacillus? This is not important. What is important is that the alien is within us, and so I do not know how this mechanism is inherited, how it is taken down the generations, but it is amazingly that a new generation may have this Soviet bacillus, and this is what we are encountering. This is what we are seeing in many people, and because I view this in an almost dramatic way. I think that this is almost schizophrenia, but I think that it may well be useful that if this is objectivized, that this materium, this matter is a part of us, so that one could be quite interested in creating a new cultural situation. Natalia Dobrolubov from Krasnoyarsk. Talking about the genes. I'm not trying to judge the situation which we are witnessing in Russia today, but clearly if you take the Soviet era and try to find a point that could be compared to today. But this bacillus, which was there, and the perception that tomorrow everything will be good, and when a generation goes through most difficult situation, and has this feeling that tomorrow would be good. And I come from a little Siberian town, but it is very difficult to see of how this roach can be taken back, and to explain to people that we probably do not live in the worst of all possible countries, and that we have resources, people, and talent, and sunshine to smile. So, talking of say a belief in a better future, what could you say? Well, thank you for your question. I think that my image has well be distorted, because I was talking about this bacillus, about this roach, which is quite unpleasant. But I did not try to say that we need to get rid of this bacillus. Whatever has been happening to us is primarily contingent on our language. This statement, as much as it can be debatable, but as a person who has been involved in public discourse and the matters of public discourse, I have been convinced more than once that we are in a somewhat strange trap when the Soviet mentality and the Soviet things Soviet are often perceived to be shameful. And I think that very few people could come out to the arena and say that yes, we come from the Soviet past, we are Soviet people. So generally, this is often regarded as something, as I said, almost shameful. But it is not about recognizing who or what we are. There is something in us. We treat this in a painful or almost morbid way, but we have to realize this is a part of us, that this is a part of culture which needs to be objectivized. If we start to be asking ourselves who is to blame, then we should all head to a psychiatric ward, and we have to be diagnosed with some sort of a psychosis. And of course, the question of diagnosis is all very speculative, and some people have themselves diagnosed, and others purport to be the physicians. So some are the doctors, the others are the patients, and this doctor-patient business is a huge and very lucrative business. So once the question arises of what is to be done, we have to pass on to a different story. So what is to be done? I remember conducting a very strange experiment, which, however strange, was successful. I changed a system of discourse. I thought up a program where I literally banned two questions: who is to blame, and what is to be done. These two questions, who is to blame and what is to be done, were to be excluded from all sorts of conversation that we're having, not because we should fear such questions, but because such questions do not seem to be yielding constructive discussions. So I suggested that my colleagues follow this very fine line and try to find some what we may call regulators in life. So we made a program which was called The Rule of Life, and this is a talk show when people come and talk about the things and how things must be done. I have to tell you that the image and the general language of people changed. So this terrible burden that a Russian publicist carries, when such a publicist is viewed as a missionary. So people come and say that if you use your toilet properly, then the life may go through a qualitative change. And if what I'm trying to say is that in this program I have changed the discourse. So it is in many ways the same kind of talk show, but they speak a different language. And this language is quite rich, and the number of people who want to come and watch this is growing exponentially. So to get out of this trap, of this impasse, is of a special importance. So I would recommend you to try and change the discourse, because there is such thing as optimism, as a faith in the future. Yeah, I think I understand. But it appears when the country is swept across by the depression and everything is bad and we cannot. It is very difficult to change something. Oh yes, we're making some little projects, but no. Oh, I disagree. I have had many cases I have recently come from Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk, where there was a festival. I was indeed very much impressed. The local government allowed to have this little discussion tent right there in front of the cinema theatre on the square, on the city square, and at night they are projecting they're projecting films on the facade of the government building. They have an architectural workshop, not unlike the Digital October Center in Moscow. So indeed, there was a very vibrant young crowd. No fights, no drunk, and people were watching a Japanese film, which I could hardly watch without falling asleep. But people were apparently quite agitated, and I think that this change of discourse and the change of instruments of how you conduct a debate changes people. Because at this time, people are not viewed as, say, cannon fodder, but they are viewed as the personalities who deserve respect. So we watch a film and then we go and discuss discuss it right there on the street. And I think that this is quite an institutional process. This is a process of how civil society can and must be born. And if the local government may use this resource properly, then people would prefer to stay where they are to raise their children. So it is probably not about words, but it's about the instruments of social policies. But I think that this is a most important question, because nothing would be feasible in this country unless the very country is treated with respect. And you have to treat the country where you live with respect. Sergey, I'm Yulia Tarkovskaya from Yaroslavl. Do you believe that the cultural TV channel, do you not think that it literally made culture evaporate from all other channels? Well, I think this is a very good question, but the contemporary media business is a well-structured instrument. This is a business which is generating profit and creates a world-class product. Post-Soviet television in many ways is a product of high quality, and I think that this is one of the most important businesses in this country, because even those things, even those programs which are taken from other channels. The content is generated by very highly qualified people and professionals. I know of only 3 or 4 European corporations which could rival with the Russian TV. That would be the BBC, German channels, and there are few channels which have such a level of professional broadcast. But generally, a culture is viewed as a segment but it's only usually just 2%. It's just 2% of the audience. So your question is, I think, dictated by what I would call a Soviet attitude towards culture and the audience, because this view that if the Soviet culture could be taken forward through, say, Channel 1 or Channel Russia or Channel 2, say this byproduct or the result of disseminating the culture would have been much more favorable. Well, I think that it is quite the converse. I think that this is only a pseudo it's an illusion. I would not readily believe that propagation of the culture through the major channels per se, as a campaign, would not have yielded much result. I think that the media business is structured differently. We are one and the same. We are, and there is no such thing that there we have the villains and here we have those who sort of allow for the culture to permeate the minds of the viewers. No, I think that we are a part of the whole. Channel culture would not have existed, because after all, we're a part of this business. Dinara Sagitova from Ulyanovsk region. We are immersed in the past. We have been in the past some 30 minutes, but as a Soviet person, a Soviet man, for that matter, was a part of a certain civilization. You have said that the young people today are free. Do you believe that this gives an advantage? Do you believe that I was at school reading the classics? Do you not think that? Are you not apprehensive of the classics evaporating from the school curriculum?
And we are saying that nothing much has changed. The situation is very much today like it was 20 years ago. What should we expect in 20 years' time? What should we expect from the youth? So I suppose I should start it all over, so I'll be brief. Well, firstly, I never said that modern young people are free. What I said that they know how to think freely and create images freely, but it is not tantamount to them being free, because they cannot be free per se. You are free and I'm unfree. No, this doesn't exist. We should have relations between us when I should say, yes, I'm free, and you would say, no, you're not. I would claim, yes, I'm free. So I must first understand what is the relationship between us before I understand that I'm free. I should invest into it. I should prove it to myself and to others around me that I'm free. You cannot give it to me as a gift. Very much like society, you need instruments in place. They help usually a man in the street who is weak, who is incapable of such aggressive actions, as I'm saying, sorry, to defend your freedoms and liberties. But it does not mean that everybody was unfree in the Soviet Union and that nowadays everybody is free. It's wrong. It is not so. This everyday household freedom, you can't imagine what it was like. You cannot even begin to imagine what a happy time it was. If this applied to your private life, personal life. But it was absolutely unfree when you went out into the public space. It was non-existent there. So, as we speak about freedom in non-freedom, it's just a pun, plain words whose sense we do not fully understand at all times. For me, freedom is tantamount to responsibility. If responsibility comes hand in hand, then certain institutions begin to work and some principles come into play. I'm sorry, you asked me about Dostoevsky. And the paper that my students write to me, essays that they write to me every year. Shall we not read students' essays instead of literature? Once Nabokov, in his lecture in US, in American university, just in passing, uttered a phrase that I'm still keep contemplating. It's very precise and to the point. He said, the main thing that was created by the great Russian classical literature, it's its readership, its reader. What he meant, not the works of art by Dostoevsky, by Tolstoy, it was the readers. They came up with a certain class of people who are capable of, in the future, to read Sholokhov and carry on. In this sense, they worked hard on this, indeed. The problem I'm referring to is that modern professional culture does not create a class of people, this wholesome class that can be qualified as readers. Is people who can know how to read, that know ABC, not illiterate, and people who have an instrument of reading their mind, they are somewhat different, they're non-existent. Because you may experiment on you. You can read something only if in your head you've got this tool, this machine for reading, not the habit, a special mechanism of reading, special mechanism of interpretation of the things you have read, and understanding the things you have read about. This is where the problem lies. So today very many people say, you remember this Russian joke about that Chukcha, just a very nasty ethnic joke, saying that we're not readers, we're writers. We're going away from the question here, going into the depth of education and other matters. I do not suppose I keep arguing about it, and I suppose I look like an urban madman. I do not suppose that reading Dostoevsky in this perspective, from the perspective you are saying, can change the nation. So, very controversial statement, but nevertheless, what I can really say to you is that, as a minimum, one granny surely did not read Dostoevsky, has certainly never read, and she's never read Philippok, because she only had 4 classes of elementary school, but she was the wisest and cultured and extremely representative of intelligence. I remember the subtle intelligence and depth. The question is that there are other mechanisms in place for culture. When we are saying you're not reading literature, you do not go to concerts, again, this is a rudiment of social mechanism, a certain phenomenon that works as a social machine, social machinery of the Soviet past. It's very simple, you know. Yuri, you surely remember, in every decent family had a library, a collection of books, and a piano. Yes, exactly. And everybody went to music school in their childhood, indeed. Maybe a couple of years, 3 years at most, but libraries were maybe selected depending on the color of the book binds. I'm saying again, as I recall that great work of art, Philippok, it would be great to reread it. It's called Pinocchio, or Golitsyno, when Uncle Carlos, it was a drawn, painted veil with a fireplace. Sometimes you have to stick at these myths about the reading nation, and to a certain extent they are painted on this paper. It's good, it's great to read Dostoevsky, nothing bad about it, but don't search a cure-all. The cure-all stays elsewhere, in the public space. This is in this dialogue and this discussion and this model of behavior, new model of behavior that is typical of men. This is where it lies. Those of you who won't read Dostoevsky, they will. Well, further on, it would be indeed a dissertation by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who claimed that education does more harm. I would stop at that, not to turn into the Soviet obscurantism. Sergey Leonidovich, in point of fact, thank you very much, and I want to point out, as I'm wrapping this session, that we were speaking about this important thing, that culture, in point of fact, it's not a library, it's not about piano. First and foremost, it's a system of values. Many years ago, the school published a set of articles edited by Samuel Huntington, that was named Culture Matters. We should all understand culture as a system of values. This is something that motivates society. So you now got the answer. What can be an instrument? Culture. What can be the path of evolutionary development? Culture. We're trying to have a broader look at things and go beyond notions that are commonly entertained in the so-called commonplace conscious. Let us thank our expert for that. Thank you very much, and if you allow me, I shall quote yet one more quote. Man whom I endlessly love and who has never allowed himself to go by the painted fireplace. He would just rip it open, and just in passing. But culture, he said, he uttered a phrase that I still recall, that nothing more consummate and precise, I haven't heard it before. He said, culture is the only way to protect yourself from life. This is a remarkable, a very profound phrase. Optimistic and, most importantly, instrumental. It helps you understand that culture, it's not a building, it's not the surface, it's the gist, the point of human being, because if you lose it, I once experienced this feeling at the war, when you suddenly realize that we went in, these two young idiots, to a woman in a cafe and we asked her, what can we order to eat? And then I realized in her eyes, by the look in her eyes, that she doesn't understand us. She doesn't understand what it means to have lunch. It doesn't mean to order. She doesn't understand our playful tone. Because money is cancelled, nothing much works, there is no government. Around you are people with arms, with guns. Life has become like naked. All this cultural layer just vanished in a matter of moments. Think about it. I shall never forget about it. Whatever we are raving about, whatever we are complaining of, we are crying about, whatever we are condemning and cursing, whatever we do not believe in, whatever we want to change, it all may disappear in a matter of seconds. And then God help us. This is something that protects us. Thank you. Well, enjoy your meal. At 2:30, please be back.
Нет, ты посмотришь, а нет, тогда после января. Нет, я запишешь? Ты не то слово, Сереж.